Hello and welcome everyone. On behalf of Citizens Greener Evanston, I want to welcome you to the second session of our Earth Day, Earth Week celebration. Earth Week is for everyone. We've got an exciting program today. We had a phenomenal program yesterday. I hope some of you were able to take part of that. Our first session that we're going to kick off with today is this one, and that's Keeping Habitat Resilient. My name's Jean Saunders, and I'm going to be the moderator for this session. So just a few words about Citizens Greener Evanston and me before we get started. So if you don't know us, we're a 10-year-old Evanston organization, and our work is to make Evanston an environmentally just, sustainable, and resilient community. We're 100% volunteer, and for those of you who joined early, I mean, certainly you could see that we're learning this as well. 100% volunteer organization. I've been part of the board of CGE since July, and I really have to say that I'm just so impressed with this organization. For those who know me, I've been an environmentalist my whole life. And since I've joined CGE, I mean, I can say my passion and commitment for environmentalism and fighting against climate change has really just been stoked. And that's because of the people I've had the opportunity and the privilege to get to know. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. The session is recorded and the slides will be made available to you later, and perhaps a recording as well. So our discussion is going to be 45 minutes long with about 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. So please put your questions into the Q&A and not the chat, which is, I know, a little different from usual Zooming. And please be judicious if you can with a chat, since we don't want it to distract from the conversation. But I know if you're like me, if you get excited, you want to add your thumbs up. So we have presentations from our guests, Leslie Shad, Tim Sonder, and Alison Sloan, who represent two of CGE's programs. Allison and Leslie are the co-leaders of Natural Habitat Evanston that, among so many other things, work to create, restore, and conserve natural habitat in Evanston. And Tim Sonder is a co-leader of Edible Evanston. That's another awesome program that inspires and supports a culture of sustainable food growing and sharing in Evanston. Leslie's going to be our first panelist. So Leslie founded and, as I said, co-leads Natural Habitat Evanston. So Natural Habitat Evanston encourages habitat for nature and people. It builds a culture that recognizes the value of wild spaces. She currently serves on the board of CGE following her retirement from a 25-year legal career with CARE USA. She previously served on the boards of National Wildlife Federation and Planned Parenthood in New York City. Leslie and her husband are continuing to work to restore forested wetlands in Northwest Indiana. So Leslie's going to talk to us and get us started with taking action for climate, community, and health. Climate, community health, and biodiversity, and doing less garden cleanup. So welcome, Leslie.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being able to join, and I'm going to just launch into won't waste any more of your time. So why should we do less garden cleanup? A typical lawn maintenance, mowing, fertilizing, water during the growing season, broadleaf herbiciding walkways, also probably insecticide on aphids if you have non-native, rose gardens or other non-native plantings, blowing away leaves and dust from your plants, mulching leaves and plant stalks and hauling them away. Well, this is a different version I'm going to talk about. This is a different vision of gardens and garden cleanup. As Jean mentioned, an easy way to take climate action, advance community health and biodiversity is really to do less. Two things: reducing lawn and leaving leaves and plant stalks. Both of those are fairly accessible to the average human being, I think. In terms of lawns, well, the reason to do this in terms of climate and health is, first of all, wasting water. 50 people overwater by 50% on average lawns in terms of lawns, and 30 to 60% of municipal freshwater supplies are actually spent on lawns. I'm going to talk more about this in a bit. We also spread toxins, herbicides, and other chemicals at 10 times the average rate of a farmer. And then there's all the lawn equipment, which blows air pollution and particulates into the air at a time that we're dealing with a respiratory pandemic, and also have elevated levels of asthma in Evanston compared to Illinois. Especially for people of color and low-income folks. Both have 21% levels of asthma in Evanston compared to 12% across Illinois. And then also there's hearing damage which can impact circulatory and respiratory systems as well. So there are lots of reasons to rethink our traditional lawn maintenance. But of course, I care about biodiversity. And each one of us has experienced the drop in biodiversity. This little cartoon on the upper right. I mean, I know, when I was learning to drive, my windshield would be covered with insects from a couple of hours of driving around on a highway. Now I can tell you that I can drive from here to Ohio and have 2 insects on my windshield because I've actually, paid attention to that. So we've all experienced, a drop in monarchs, 90% in the United States, 90% drop in monarchs. The rusty patch bumblebee used to be a very common or widespread pollinator in the lower 48 and 18 states. And now it's dropped 87%, 28 states, pardon me. In 28 states, and now its population has dropped 87%. Songbirds also, perhaps relating to the drop in insects. Songbirds, our populations are down 30%. This is all validated by global studies, and we're going to share out our slides, so I'm not going to sweat the details here and going through every single bit of the slides. Well, something that really struck home to me in a New York Times article was that, we all pay attention to the megafauna, the charismatic megafauna of monarchs and rusty patch bumblebees. But the deeper worry, they said, is that a whole insect world might be quietly going missing. And it makes me think of all the tiny little things that we see for an instant and then they're gone. So it's really something that we need to, we almost have I feel like, personally, I feel a moral obligation to reverse insect decline. So you got it. So that's that. So in terms of mowing less, what we're suggesting is, first of all, if you do have lawn, mow less often. You don't have to mow in dry seasons, and you can also raise the height of your mower. You can also plant more native plants so that there's less area to mow. And the reason we're trying to get rid of turf grass is it's our largest irrigated crop in the United States. It uses more land than corn, wheat, and fruit trees combined, according to NASA imagery. So, it creates ecological dead zones. We mow it before it can produce seeds or nectar or pollen. And it's a non-native plant, native to Europe and Asia. Basically, the whole construct of a lawn was an symbol, an emblem of elitism, that, you were rich enough to be able to afford the yard crews that could produce a perfectly manicured lawn. And it displaces native plants. This picture is of Lovelace Park, where the green area in the center is where it was too wet to mow. So the city wasn't able to mow this for a little while. And a lot of people wrote in. We got a lot of people to write in to 311 and tell them how great it looked, in the hope that we can kind of preserve this, an area that's not being used for sports fields or picnics or anything else. Maybe it can just be a little unmowed meadow. So here's the alternative. Here is a neighbor friend of Allison's and mine, and this is her parkway, and she converted it to a wild, woodland garden. There are alternatives to grass that are similar to grass, actually, that are natives. Buffalo grass can grow in the sun. Pennsylvania James and Ivory sedge can grow in the shade or semi-shade. So there are ways to, sort of create letting those go to seed and letting them grow. They kind of flop over and create more of a wavy pattern of natural grass. And of course, what Nancy and Laurie have done in their garden here in front of us is add also native ground covers. So there's, I think, some wild ginger and sedum, and there are other additional wildflowers to use. And of course, there are no-mow mixes, which are non-native mixes, but also at least you don't mow them. So there is some greater wildlife benefit to those. And here's another example. We're not suggesting you have to get rid of all of your lawn. This is next to a lawn, but somebody has put in Mary Jane Klein has put in her pollinator garden. So doing less, and the second step that I mentioned was leaving the leaves and plant stalks. This is a rusty patch bumblebee, by the way, that I mentioned. You can see the little saddle on its back that is a rusty color. So we're doing a project in Evanston between now and November, trying to monitor for the rusty patch bumblebee. But the reason to leave leaves and plant stalks is really that insects overwinter in leaves and plant stalks. Many of us know of the monarch, and that the monarch migrates down to Mexico. And, we all think that's amazing. Well, it is amazing. Most insects do not migrate. Most insects, there are some butterflies that migrate, but most insects stay right in our yards. So the leaf litter is really important to protect them during the winter. And it also is shelter and food for birds. Birds will go into the leaf litter to pull out bugs and to also shelter from cold. So what we're suggesting is not that you just leave the leaves where they fall. If you have lawn, you need to rake it under, trees and shrubs, or, into flower beds. If you do that, you need to leave a little space around tree trunks so that the trees can breathe, 3 inches around tree trunks or so. But basically just move them into flower beds because they will deteriorate. It may take a little time, but they're providing a service in the meantime for insects and birds. And when they do deteriorate, they are nourishment for the plants that they are surrounding. So here's some examples. About this time of year, I start to get questions about, well, when can I tow my leaves away? Well, don't do it yet. So the problem is the insects have been overwintering, and if you tow the leaves away now, we're losing all the benefit we've accumulated by waiting with our leaves. This little butterfly is a purplish copper, no longer very common, but it never was extremely common, but it's even less common. It overwinters as an egg at the base of this plant, which is a smart weed that many of us would possibly be pulling and calling a real weed. But this little bug relies on this weed. And in eggs, the eggs will overwinter, and after there gets to be warm weather, it takes 8 to 10 days for the eggs to hatch. So the eggs will hatch, and you'll have incy-wincy caterpillars. And caterpillars then live in your leaves for another couple of weeks, and then you get cocoons, and that waits for another week or two. So easily this can be June before this bug has emerged from egg to butterfly and flown out of your leaves. So it really does, the suggestion is just leave your leaves, see if you can. It's a different way of thinking about it. It's a different way of tolerating biodiversity. So these are 2 other examples. Many people know that the monarch relies on milkweed in order for it to become an adult, to develop biologically. Well, that's not unique about monarchs. This is the spangled fritillary. It relies on violets. And this is the Baltimore checker spot, and it relies on the white turtlehead. About 90% of insects rely on host plants, just like the monarch relies on milkweed. So what is sort of semi-adorable about these 2 butterflies is that they will crawl into, as caterpillars to overwinter, they crawl into the base of their favorite food plants. Sorry. So the Baltimore checker spot will make a little burrow at the base of the white turtlehead, And so will the fritillary at the base of violets, so that when they emerge in the spring, they're right near their favorite foods. And I gotta say, that's like exactly the move my oldest boy would take to curl up next to his favorite food and spend the winter. That's him. These are just other examples of bugs that we lose when we toss our leaves. Fireflies really depend on leaf litter. They can be under the topsoil, but the leaf litter is important to protection of the topsoil. Bumblebees, most bumblebees overwinter. They can overwinter in mouse holes or just under the soil. So they also need that leaf protection. These are bees that are non-stinging bees, the mining bee that tunnels in. Our native ladybug is not the kind that crowds into our kitchens at wintertime. Our native ladybug is under leaves and bark and whatever debris it can find. So that's another important insect for the wintertime. And this is the woolly bear, although I'm showing you the woolly bear in moth form. So we all know that the woolly bear comes out in autumn, and that's its moth form. It overwinters as a caterpillar. So in addition to leaves, it's plant stalks. Leaving plant stalks is important. Our mantises and walking sticks basically lay egg cases on plant stalks. This is a gall fly that has little galls inside this goldenrod gall. Our little fly is, well, probably one little fly, actually. The different moths, you can imagine the Luna moth is a gorgeous giant moth, sort of, pale green moth. And its cocoon looks just like a little wrap of leaves. If it falls into the leaf litter, we would never notice that. And even hung on plant stalks, we very likely would not notice that that's a cocoon, similar to the giant swallowtail, which also, is very easily camouflaged. Leaf litters, the leaf blowers I've mentioned a little bit of, but they blast biodiversity, so that we lose biodiversity by our leaf litters. They cough up pollen and pollute, and noise pollution can raise stress levels and cause headaches. So there is actually on Monday an amendment to the leaf blower ordinance that is up for introduction to the city council in Evanston. So we're pretty excited to see that. It will extend the ban period for leaf blowers. And yes, so that's the end of my talk. These are references to the various things that I've mentioned that will be when we share out the slide deck. And I want to highlight that Allison is going to be talking at greater length about trees on the 29th of April. So that registration link is also on our PowerPoint. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leslie. That was tremendous. I learned a lot, and I'm sure our guests and attendees did as well. I noticed there are a couple of questions in the Q&A. Thank you for adding those in. We'll get to those at the end. So next up is Tim. In addition to serving as the co-leader for Citizens Greener Evanston, Edible Evanston, Tim is the education chair for that tremendous program. Tim grew up in Midtown Manhattan. He's always loved nature and gardening, hunting for mushrooms since he could walk, learning to grow plants by his grandmother's side. In his summers, he worked on a farm in Vermont as a teenager and has been an organic vegetable gardener since first moving to his first house in Evanston in the 80s. Now he's an advocate of permaculture and other regenerative practices. He has a deep interest in soil health and the intersection of soil biology, plants, fungi, ecosystems, and the environment. He has an inspiring presentation about climate and soil health. So welcome, Tim.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And yeah, I found Leslie's talk inspiring, and a lot of it will connect to what I'm going to be talking about, because leaving the leaves and leaving plant roots in the ground and all those things are going to help produce healthy soil for plants and for our climate and for ourselves. So I'm going to discuss the interaction of soil health with climate and human health. And I gotta manage to get my slides to, there we go. So what are the foundations of life on this planet? During Earth Week, I'll remind you that everything comes down to the substance we call Earth. Of course, oceans and rivers and streams are critical as well, but so much life depends upon the soil, including our lives. So how can we each benefit by improved soil health? Healthy soil can store carbon to slow climate change. Healthy soil improves the water quality of those streams, rivers, and oceans I mentioned. And healthy soil grows more nutrient-dense food to improve both human health and animal health and feed a growing population. A growing population is an astounding thing. We were only a few decades ago were we 1 billion people, and now we're almost 8 billion people. So we're all stewards. All those 8 billion people are stewards of the soil we depend on. And you might not be a farmer, but you can still be part of the soil health solution. Here's what each of us can do. If you're an activist consumer and know your farmer and farm practices, you can make a difference. You can buy from organic no-till farmers. You can support farmers growing a diverse range of crops and not monocrops. You can support farmers using cover crops, which is really critical and probably hard to find out. But ask your farmer. If you consume meat, choose those farms that are integrating animals with other crops or using sustainable grazing practices. It makes a huge difference. And then here at home, manage your own garden for soil health. And this connects a lot with what Leslie was saying. Grow a diverse range of plants. Don't grow a monocrop yourself. Do not use chemical fertilizers or pesticides or herbicides. Keep your soil covered year-round, either with living plants or with mulch, those leaves that we were discussing, or straw, anything to keep the soil covered. Favor perennials instead of annuals, and slow-growing leafy crops instead of fast-fruiting crops. They'll put more energy into the soil, as we'll discuss. Protect trees, and then, again, as Leslie was saying, reduce the lawn size and decrease mowing frequency. So Leslie was emphasizing how short the grass is at the top and how we don't get seeds. Well, guess what? If you cut grass like that, you also don't get roots. And then, even if you don't control land, advocate for policy. Support government policies to protect the soil at local, regional, and global levels. Support conversion of our parks here in Evanston to chemical-free, diverse natural areas. Again, showing the same thing that Leslie was saying. Advocate for change in financial incentives and investments from big ag, and go from yields to long-term benefits and profits. Support programs like here in Illinois, the Spring Savings for Fall Covers, to incentivize farmers to use more regenerative practices. Support payments to farmers for other eco-services. So this means using your food dollars in order to help support good farm practices. So it's all connected. The basic ingredients of life on this planet are water, sunlight, and carbon. And the engine of the planet is photosynthesis. It turns those ingredients into almost all the forms of carbon-based life and the organic compounds on this planet. Other than sunlight, everything else was already here on Earth, and it just cycles. So, if we're talking about healthy soil, we need to describe what soil is. What is soil? It's not dirt. Healthy soil is teeming with bacteria, fungi, nematodes, worms, protozoa, and arthropods. Billions with a B, in just a teaspoon of soil. of healthy soil. And it's plants that feed the life in the soil and depend on soil biology for their life. So this is a little wonky, but how does it work? It's a carbon cycle. Actually, there's both a slow and a fast carbon cycle, but it all goes round and round. Carbon is stored in living things, in the oceans, in the atmosphere, in the soil and rocks, while some carbon is stored long-term deep in the ocean, in the earth or in the ocean sediments. A lot of carbon cycles. So more carbon is stored in soil than in the Earth's vegetation and in the atmosphere combined. So we're all concerned about the amount in the atmosphere, but all the vegetation plus the atmosphere amount, more is stored in the soil. Plants grab CO2 from the atmosphere and convert it to sugars, to liquid carbon. It's either retained in their bodies, such as in tree trunks, or it's put into the soil, or it's returned to the atmosphere when plants actually use the sugars themselves for energy. The living soil, as shown here, holds twice as much carbon as the atmosphere. So you see 2,300 gigatons versus 800 gigatons. So microbes in the soil cycle carbon as they consume it and then die, providing plant-available nutrients. And given the right ingredients, microbes, especially fungi, can use those plant sugars to make stable forms of carbon like humus and glomalin, where the carbon is bound to minerals, mineralized. These forms are resistant to further decomposition unless disturbed by environmental conditions. So they're stable, and in trying to change climate, we want stable carbon in the soil. So what role do plants have in building that carbon in the soil? This is amazing. Plants put 60% of their energy, sugars, proteins, fats, carbohydrates, and other forms of carbon they create through photosynthesis into the soil. The remaining 40% is turned into what we see as plants. Half of what the plants put into the soil we can see as roots. But the other half, known as plant exudates, is sent out of those roots and into the surrounding soil to feed the bacteria and fungi around them, if the plant is growing in healthy soil without chemical fertilizers. So this generous, magical gift evolved because those microbes can provide everything else the plant needs if their populations are healthy and diverse. So plants are putting 30% of their energy into the soil as a sugary kind of carbon solution to feed microbes. And they're doing it for good reason. So that's plants building soil, but humans have been destroying it. By plowing and tilling, we've increased erosion on agricultural fields by 10 to 100 times their natural rates. Agricultural practices that disturb the soil, such as tilling, removing crop residue, and overgrazing, expose the soil carbon to oxygen, allowing it to oxidize and escape into the atmosphere. Just admitting that deforestation, which is another big problem, thawing permafrost from climate change, and the draining of peatlands also reduces carbon from soil. Over just the last several decades, the US Corn Belt may have lost about half of the topsoil that natural processes produced over thousands of years. A tragedy for our region that started with the best farmland in the world, on the planet. Agricultural practices in the last century caused 2/3 of the carbon which was in the soil to move to the atmosphere. That's a change in soil organic matter from 5% down to 1.5% on average. And that resulted in about a quarter of all the man-made global greenhouse emissions that are warming the planet. So it makes a huge impact on climate change. So I'm sorry, I moved a slide ahead too early, but that's about soil. How does this interact with water? Well, healthy soil improves water quality, and resilience to storms and drought. Again, a reminder that everything is connected. Trees and other plants need rain, but rain needs trees, as their transpiration feeds the clouds. Living plants covering the soil have a major impact on climate. Climate change is contributing to more major storm events and more drought, as we know. And soil organic matter, carbon, in the soil greatly increases the water holding power of soil. A 1% increase in soil organic carbon equates to about a 2% increase in water holding capacity. That translates to storing another 25,000 gallons per acre, which is then available for plants during a drought. The soil organic matter holds the water from rain and snow cover, letting crops survive those periods of drought. Consistently, farms without irrigation, but with these practices, outperform their neighbors in years of drought, and really outperform in a significant way. So that's resilience, and what we're after is climate resilience. So what about during storms? Well, higher levels of soil organic matter allow infiltration to prevent runoff and erosion, both protecting the soil and our waterways. When storms dump a lot of rain in a short period of time, the water needed for crops can't infiltrate into poor compacted soils low in organic matter. Instead, the water runs right off and takes the valuable topsoil with it and creates those toxic algae blooms in dead zones from Lake Erie to the Gulf of Mexico. And Leslie indicated that all the chemicals put on lawns cause those same problems. So it's true here and true on farms. I'm sorry, I moved ahead and I should. Keeping the soil covered with growing deep-rooted vegetation makes all the difference. Introducing perennials, grasses, agroforestry, managed forestry, or using cover crops has been shown to provide huge infiltration rate increases. And you can see here in this illustration that the different types of practices will allow different amount of water to infiltrate. Gabe Brown, who's it's my private joke, a famous farmer from North Dakota who changed his practices to use diverse cover crops, no-till farming, and rotational grazing, has seen his soil organic matter increase from 1.9% to 6.1%, and with it, the water infiltration rates rise from just half an inch an hour to 8 inches an hour. His neighbors, both organic and conventional farms using tillage and no cover crops, are lucky if they can even absorb that half inch an hour from just a normal rainfall as opposed to a storm. So what does this all mean when it comes to our bodies, human health, animal health, and also the bodies of plants, plant health? An increase in soil humus, organic matter, has been shown to lead to both higher nutrient density in food and plant resilience to pests and disease. The Rodale Institute reports nutrient density of food and vegetables grown in the US has declined in the past 50 to 70 years. They contain less protein, calcium, phosphorus, iron, riboflavin, and vitamin C than they used to. But farming practices have been shown to be part of the problem. Sorry. The substances that plants make to protect themselves when grown in healthy soil are the plant's immune response and are also those same phytonutrients in our food shown to boost our own immune response. So plants grown in healthy soil will produce those phytonutrients to make themselves strong and make us strong. The more farmers have used chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and fungicides, the more they seem to need them. This is due in part to the destruction they cause to the microbial life and the plant-microbe interaction, which boost immune health in plants. High levels of applied nitrogen fertilizer can lead to increased water uptake and reduced nutrient density. And plants provided with too much nitrogen are also more susceptible to pests and diseases, in part due to weak cell walls and low sugars. So those aphids that Leslie mentioned are attracted to plants that get too much nitrogen, so don't dump it on your plants. Initial research shows agroecological regenerative farming systems increase the macronutrients, micronutrients like zinc, manganese, iron, and copper, and phytonutrients. So, in summary, diverse living soil quickly builds soil organic matter and can help provide healthy plants, healthy food, healthy water, resilient farms, and reduce greenhouse gases. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. That was great. Again, so much information and so well delivered. We really appreciate that, and that you're outside. And I saw some folks going by, so maybe they were enjoying.
And maybe some bird song.
Yes, maybe they were enjoying your presentation too. So our last presenter this morning is Alison Sloan. Please join me in welcoming Allison. I met Allison for the first time last Saturday. We volunteered together doing buckthorn removal up along the golf course. So Allison leads tree walks and tree planting, and as a tree keeper certified by Open Lands, she co-leads Natural Habitat Evanston, as I said in her introduction, with Leslie. She's a steward of natural area restoration at Herbert Payne Park in Evanston. If you haven't been there, please check it out. She leads weekly work days focused on removing invasive plants and replanting with natives to improve habitat for birds, pollinators, and other wildlife. She soon will be selling Illinois native plants at the Evanston Farmers Market under her new business, Shady Grove Wildflower Farm. Please welcome Allison, and she's going to talk to us about why trees matter. Thanks, Allison.
Thank you, Jean, and it's great to hear such enlightening presentations from Leslie and Tim. Wow. So I'm here to talk about trees, and I will dive right in. Simply put, if humankind is going to combat climate change effectively, we need to immediately stop cutting down so many trees, and we need to begin planting millions and even billions more of them to replace what's been lost. To achieve this accomplishment, we are going to need to somehow be able to reverse the universal and age-old mindset that trees are only financially valuable when we have cut them down to use them for timber, to build our houses, to clear land for agriculture, for livestock grazing, or to even make toilet paper, office paper. The list goes on and on. And so to make this case that reforestation is more beneficial than deforestation, we are going to all need to become versed in what are called ecosystem services of trees, which are the term for the enormous benefits and services that trees provide for us when we leave them standing and part of the living ecosystem around us, instead of cutting them down for profit and using them for timber. Here are my children trying to wrap their arms around the champion Illinois cherry bark oak tree in Southern Illinois. I just thought I'd throw that in for interest. Let's see. So to start to learn, even in your own backyard, about the ecosystem services of trees, that's really a terrific tool online called the Tree Benefit Calculator at treebenefits.com. And if you know which species of trees you have growing around your home or around your neighborhood or your school, you can log in and enter the species and enter the diameter. And it tells you how to measure that and your zip code. And you will come out with this nifty chart that shows you how much stormwater this tree absorbs every year, how much carbon it absorbs out of the atmosphere, how much money it might be saving you on your electricity bill, and how much value it's added to the cost of your home and to your property. So the deforestation is a problem worldwide, but it's a problem everywhere, including in Evanston. And this is a really large cottonwood that was cut down a couple of years ago behind the Walgreens on Green Bay Road. So we lose many trees here still to Dutch elm disease and to emerald ash borer. And we don't have an ordinance protecting trees on private property yet. So we also still lose a lot of trees simply because the property owner finds them too messy, too shady, too big, too dangerous, too close to the house, too close to the fence, to their gutter, their sewer pipe, their alley, their power line, or because they want to build a bigger garage, expand their porch, or like my neighbor just did, take out 3 trees to put in a swimming pool. So trees come down here frequently too. And so the educational and policy challenge for all of us is going to be to reverse this mindset by learning about the benefits and the ecosystem services of keeping trees alive. Starting with oxygen and the air that we breathe. As trees scientist and author Diana Beresford Kroger reminds us, for every breath you take, thank a tree. So human life on Earth is only possible because photosynthesis from plant leaves has created an oxygen-rich atmosphere for us to breathe, starting with the first photosynthetic cyanobacteria 2.5 billion years ago that enabled the evolution of oxygen-breathing organisms. And if you live near trees, you're fortunate to have your own personal oxygen generator, air purifier, and humidifier. Trees filter the air. They remove lots of air pollution, such as carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxides from cars. The biggest trees capture the most pollution because they have more leaves. Having more trees in your area can lead to fewer deaths in your area. In New York City, for example, trees save an average of 8 lives every year. And you will have lower childhood asthma rates the more trees you have in your neighborhood. And then the flip side in photosynthesis is, the leaves are all releasing, producing oxygen for us to breathe. And like Tim said, they're also absorbing all of the carbon in the atmosphere and storing it. So this, some scientists estimate that if we reforested all of the land not currently being used for cities or by agriculture, we could capture 2/3 of man-made carbon emissions. And so to that end, one component of the City of Evanston's Climate Action and Resilience Plan, or CARP, is to plant more trees. They have some goals put out that to try to aim for net 500 new trees by 2025, which is more challenging than you might think, simply because we're losing so many trees to emerald ash borer and Dutch elm disease right now. And another goal is to at last adopt a tree preservation ordinance. So, so trees on private property have a little bit more protection. Trees keep us cooler. If you live in an area that has fewer trees, your neighborhood is going to be hotter. shade trees can lower the surrounding temperature by 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit and shade the surfaces underneath, such as sidewalks, as much as 40 degrees cooler, and reducing the heat island effect in many cities. And this saves lives. If you're in an area with fewer trees, your neighborhood is going to be hotter, and there will be more fatalities from heat-related illness. Trees pay us back financially too. Our energy bills from cooling the house in the summer and blocking wind in the winter can save us up to 30% of our electricity bills every year. They increase our homes' values. Homes with big trees on the property can sell for up to 10% higher prices. On average, each yard, large front tree in the yard adds 1% to the sales price, and large trees can add 10%. Another interesting study involves shopping habits. It's interesting to note that shoppers are willing to travel farther and spend 12% longer time inside a store if there are trees outside and it's shaded. And scientists have tried to research and put a price tag on these benefits, and have come up with one single large tree producing benefits of around $3,000 or more over a 40-year lifespan. And in Chicago, the 157 million trees provide services worth $195 million per year. Trees are crucial for absorbing stormwater and preventing flooding. This is an extremely important benefit during global warming and the unusual weather patterns. All of those millions of roots are like millions of straws underground, soaking up rainwater. And leaves also can capture rainwater as it falls. And so this leads to less flooding and less stormwater entering the systems and needing treatment. And the U.S. Forest Service estimates that one mature tree can intercept 2,500 gallons of rainfall every year. So trees build community. People are more likely to go outside and congregate and do activities together if it's shady. Children are more likely to be outside playing instead of staying inside if it's too hot and there's no shade. There's fewer property crimes, fewer violent crimes, greater sense of safety. Trees actually help us relax. Diana Beresford Kroger says that there are chemical compounds emitted by the leaves that actually have an effect on our neurological systems as sort of an anesthetic and make us feel more calm and peaceful. So these reduce our blood pressure. They can help hospital patients recover more quickly if they are seeing trees out their window. They increase worker productivity. They reduce children's stress levels. They absorb traffic sound and make our streets quieter. There are fewer violent crimes. Adolescents are less aggressive. Fewer crimes in apartment complexes, less road rage, just from having trees around. I love this photo. So root systems obviously do a lot to hold soil in place and stabilize slopes and embankments and prevent landslides. And then of course, there's all the wildlife benefits and the fact that trees, especially oak trees in our region, are critical habitat that feed and shelter so much of the animals and insects around us. The nuts, seeds, fruits, insects, and especially caterpillars that are relying on oak trees in particular here. 500 different species of caterpillars need oak trees, and that's what all of the birds use to raise their young. Trees, of course, feed humans too. These are some of the native fruits and nuts that grow in the United States. Maple syrup, of course, is from trees of black walnuts, pecans, formerly American chestnuts, hickory nuts, acorns, persimmons, pawpaws, wild plums, mulberries, serviceberries, crab apples. Those are all native American tree foods. And then, of course, a lot of the grocery store produce that we buy too are the tree foods from other parts of the world, but apples, pears, peaches, plums, figs, citrus, avocado, coffee, almond, chocolate, mango, and the list goes on and on. Trees give us beauty and privacy, especially during this time of year when so many things are in bloom. So I just wanted to conclude by recommending some great books for more reading. Trees have been actually in the news a lot in the past few years due to several really interesting books and new discoveries about the social life of forest, how trees are all interconnected underneath the forest floor, and actually not competing with each other, but supporting each other and feeding each other, warning each other of predators and keeping each other alive in a very cooperative communication network. So there's a lot of interesting information out there. So the next time you're thinking of removing a tree, don't forget to factor in all of the benefits as well. And thank you.
Thank you, Allison. That was tremendous. And I know you have some rich resources in there as well. So we want to make sure that we get those out to folks, and we'll include those, as we said, when we send out the PowerPoint slides. So we have about, I think we're going to try to wrap up just a few minutes before noon, because another session will start, and we want to give them a chance to get oriented like you saw us getting oriented. So I'm going to just read a couple of the questions from the chat. I'll try to direct one to each of our panelists, and we may not get them all answered. So Mark, thanks for your question. You asked, what are considered the best 10 to 12 pollinator plants or any other added value plants? Now that sounds like a question for Leslie.
So I did put in chat some links to talent. Well, I listed the top of the wildflower list from Talamy, and also the top of the tree wildlife benefits from Talamy's list. So Doug Talamy is an entomologist at the University of Delaware, and he has prioritized species according to the most caterpillar species they support, because caterpillars feed everything else. So I did put that in chat, and we could share out a link perhaps if we have the names of people attending this or something, or the emails. I don't know how that works afterwards, but I'm happy to share out more information, or else email us at habitat@naturalhabitatevanston.org. Email your questions afterwards at habitat@naturalhabitatevanston.org.
Thanks, Leslie. That was tremendous. Mark, you had asked, soil tilling is as old as human history of growing food versus hunting. So what should we be advocating for, and to whom? So that sounds like a question for Tim. And I know you answered it in the Q&A feature. I just wanted to make sure that the rest of our guests heard your answer.
No, I would love to answer that. So practices, well, the first thing I want to say is, yes, tilling is as old as human history, but so people were nomadic, they moved on, civilizations collapsed, all because of destroying soil. So it was a technique we could do when there weren't so many people, and we had plenty of land that we felt like we could take over and destroy. And we don't have that land anymore. the Dust Bowl showed us what some of this destruction can do, and we still haven't learned, apparently, except we are learning. So there are new practices that are no-till. There are is heavy adoption of no-till agriculture, certainly not enough adoption, but much of that, unfortunately, right now depends on use of herbicides. There are definitely organic no-till practices and and cover crops and other things which have been shown to work. And so those things are moving forward, protecting soil. Farmers do have techniques. Unfortunately, there was a fascinating study I heard about the other day looking at adoption of these things on county lines, and an awful lot of it is about changing the social structure of farmers and what they each think are acceptable and who's teaching them what. So if we get out the right information, we can save our soil, save our lands, store more carbon, and if we pay our farmers for those services as consumers or as a government, as a nation, then we can be protecting the soil and not reducing our access to food.
Thanks, Tim. That was great. We have time, I'm afraid, for just one more question, but if you do have other questions, reach out to us at CGE and we'll make sure that we get all of your questions answered. The last one, I think this is for you, Allison, and it's from Lynn. Thanks, Lynn. You mentioned that a large tree absorbs more CO2 than a small tree. Is there a scale that describes the rate of tree by size, somehow to encourage the preservation of older trees versus just planting smaller trees? That sounds like it might be a long answer or a complicated answer, but maybe you could point Lynn in the direction of finding that kind of resource.
I'm not sure if there probably is online somewhere. That would be really interesting to find out. Leslie, have you seen anything like that? Any sort of scale comparing all different tree sizes with their carbon rates? Oh, Leslie's muted.
Well, thanks, Allison. And maybe
I want to make one comment, is that if you look at when plants are active, and the growth rings of trees in the spring, they are actively growing and more carbon, and you can see the carbon in the atmosphere changes based on the season because of that growth.
Mm.
Great. Thanks, Tim. I'm going to wrap it up here. So first of all, panelists, you were outstanding. I think everybody listening will agree. I also want to just quickly give a quick shout out to our tech hosts, Steve Goranson and Bruce Baumberger. You may not have been able to see them on the screen, but like me, they're members of Evanston Lighthouse Rotary and passionate about the environment. So they volunteered to help produce this session. So they've been invaluable.